All right, so we want to turn to another guest, another panelist that we have joining us. Joining us now is Maynard Caliendo. He's a political science professor at North Central College. All right, so thank you. I know there have been at times during our political sessions that you are a regular guest, so thank you again for giving of your time. So
sounds like you're having too much fun there.
We are. Come join the party. All right, so let's talk about some of the key races. We know Chuy Garcia. We are still looking at state's attorney. In your mind right now, what is sticking out to you, possibly as something that you were not expecting?
Yeah, I mean, really, Erica, most of the stuff has gone as expected. It's a good night for incumbents for the most part. In a primary, it's a good night for former President Trump, not just in Illinois, but in Ohio and other places as well. Whether or not that translates into a good night for Trump-backed candidates in November is a completely different story, of course. But as we've seen in the primaries, he tends to hold some sway. I'm watching, of course, the state's attorney's race. It's still close. Not enough votes in to make a call. And then the other thing I'm looking at is the ballot referendum, which there was a good bit of money put toward advertising on both sides of the ballot on the ballot initiative about the property tax, or not the property tax, but the transfer tax, the real estate transfer tax.
Right. Maybe we can. I'm curious to see if we have newer numbers on that, Stephen. Let's hope we can get up the Bring Chicago Home numbers here while we have you. But on that note, on a bigger picture, winners and losers tonight, you mentioned this. Is Brandon Johnson a loser tonight if Bring Chicago Home goes down and Clayton Harris goes down? Is this as much maybe a referendum big picture on what has been a number of successes for the progressives in Chicago?
There's no question about that. I think that's a wonderful point. I mean, this is the first election since Brandon Johnson was elected mayor, and so we know where he stood on the issue on the referendum for sure. You can see it there. It looks like almost a 10-point differential at this moment with 81% of the vote in. So CBS hasn't called it yet, but it looks like it's destined to fail. And that is, again, there was money put in this. I think there was some uncertainty about the specific language in the ballot. I think folks who rent in particular weren't sure how it might affect rents, if there was a trickle-down effect from these transfers. And so there was a lack of clarity there. Probably wasn't executed as well. But no question that's at least partially a referendum on Brandon Johnson.
So, Stephen, let's talk about voter turnout. And some of these key races, I've heard it go both ways. The Board of Elections was saying that they thought that low voter turnout would make some of these races closer than expected. We're not necessarily seeing that in, Danny Davis or a Chuy Garcia or something like that. But what do you think that it does mean when you have low voter turnout, shockingly low at this stage, and particularly not having a younger vote come out for some of these issues?
Yeah, and of course, as a political scientist and someone who spends his life at a college, I'm really disappointed in that, but I'm disappointed regularly in that. I mean, we've done all the right things in Illinois in terms of access to the ballot, making it easier to vote early, being able to vote by mail without needing an excuse to do so, same-day registration. I mean, we've done all the things that for years political scientists had pointed to and said these are barriers to ballot access, and these are things that are hurting voter turnout. And yet, we did see some increase when we first did them during the pandemic and into 2022, but we're starting to see that backslide a little bit. We saw it in 2023, and we're seeing it again tonight. And I'm really disappointed about that. You're right, though, Erica, that in a race that is a little bit that is close. Every vote matters. And so when the denominator shrinks, my particular vote is more powerful. And so we really want to encourage people to participate in the process, particularly in those off-year elections. The other thing I'll say just really quickly is because there was neither of the presidential primaries were competitive by the time we got to today by Illinois, that certainly decreased voter turnout as well. If we were voting in February, we would have had higher voter turnout than we had tonight.
Let's take a bigger picture, and you're really a great one to talk to about this, and I do want to bring our panel in after your answer, Stephen, but former Governor Edgar talked about this, and that is the Electoral College. So, I just wonder if some of this has to do with the apathy in many states, because we all know what the state's either going to be red or blue, and it comes down to a handful, as we know. All right, I'm sure you've heard of the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact. This is a compact that a number of states have signed on to, in which they would give their Electoral College votes to the candidate that gets the most votes nationwide in the popular vote. Again, there are 205 electoral votes in states that have signed on to this, another 65, and obviously whoever wins the popular vote would get the 270 needed to become president. It's very controversial. It's likely not to happen. But is this something you would support?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of electoral reforms that I think we might be looking at. The Electoral College is certainly one. It's amazing. You know, when I started my career, I got my PhD in '98. We never talked much about the Electoral College because it had been so long since the winner of the plurality didn't win the presidency. And then 2000 happened. And that was the first time since 1888 that the winner of the plurality of the popular vote didn't get elected president. Now, we've seen it several times since then. So I think that there's a constitutional question with respect to the national agreement. The Constitution is very clear about how electors should be chosen. And so we've had different options of checking on electors. We had, Colorado had a referendum that failed some years ago to do proportional representation. We could do states can decide to do a system like Maine and Nebraska use, where they allocate 2 votes to the popular vote winner statewide, and then go congressional district by congressional district. But this notion of having electoral votes committed that are different than the state's popular vote is tremendously controversial, and I'm not even sure if it's constitutional.
Right.
All right. Stephen, we wanted to bring you in on what was a pretty heated back and forth between our 2 panelists here. Before we do that, though, thank you. I'm hoping you can stay with us. We want to go out to Congressman Chuy Garcia. We were seeing him making his way through the crowd, and now a lot of his supporters are up on the stage. He is about to take the mic, and as we said earlier, he is the projected winner at this point. Not quite up to the mic yet, but we wanted to bring you a picture there from his headquarters in Brighton Park as we start to hear the audience and his supporters.
Warm-up act.
Yes. Start to chant for him.
Well, maybe you can get to your question with Stephen then while we wait.
All right, so we'll get back to Chuy here. So, Stephen, earlier our panelists were talking about the state's attorney's race, and we're talking about Burke, of course, and Harris, where a lot of times Burke is getting the support of even conservatives, and that support because they want to see change. What are your thoughts on that? It's specifically when we talk about, okay, the status quo versus some sort of change where we don't have the same policies that Kim Foxx has already instituted.
Yeah, and I think that both of the Democratic candidates in this race sort of departed from Kim Foxx in a number of ways and separated themselves from that. I think what's left to be decided, of course, so often in Chicago, the Democratic primary is the real election. And I think that's probably the case here tonight in the state's attorney's race. But Bob Fioretti's waiting in the wings. And I think if folks are really worried about crime and they're tending to move more in a more conservative direction on crime or rejecting progressive ideas about how to deal with crime, community-based policing, et cetera, then it may be more of an interesting race than we give it credit for in November, particularly if some outside groups decide to come in and spend a lot of money. But there's no question that we're seeing concern about crime kind of influence how progressive people are feeling at the ballot box in this particular race tonight.
I guess we'll find out if we're ready for Fioretti. Wasn't that his campaign slogan?
Yes, that was when he ran for mayor.
When he ran for mayor, yeah. All right, Stephen, it's again always great to have you. We appreciate the insight and the input. Have a great night.
Yeah, I guess we're not talking about water reclamation district. What's wrong with you folks?
You can feel free.
It's so juicy, but
we can talk about it then.